Hello, everyone. This is Brody Hirsch, and for my final presentation, I've decided to go with Chapter 12, which covers social psychology. Students often aren't too keen on social interactions when it comes to the classroom setting, which is why you're reviewing this online and not in person. This section starts out with a darker story depicting what can be a result of social psychology. It depicts how Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old boy, was running, practicing for sports, when he was pursued by George Zimmerman, a police officer, and eventually fatally shot. Zimmerman was found not guilty, but to most people, what he did was caused by bias and what we will cover throughout this presentation, internal factors. To get right into it, 12.1's title asks the seemingly simple question: what is social psychology? In general terms, social psychology is the study of how a situation can affect one's thoughts and or behaviors. We've all most likely found ourselves in social interactions, whether it be friends, family, classmates, strangers, etc. But have you ever stopped to think why you said what you said, or what caused you to act the way that you did, for better or for worse? Well, that is exactly what social psychology asks and tries to answer. While social psychology uses both internal and external factors, I believe the main focus, or the overall bigger picture, is external factors. Internal factors do play the smaller roles, like how one thinks or how they are influenced, or what past biases each individual person brings to the situation they find themselves in. Social psychology focuses on the parts of the social interactions most people tend to leave out or not even consider as a factor, and that's the social and or situational influences, which might seem like a huge oversight, but this is something that we deal with nearly daily. Talking to one or more people, almost becoming blind to the fact that who we talk to and what we talk about can almost completely alter ourselves in demeanor and or in speech. 12.1 also covers situationism, which is the belief that people react based off of an immediate response to whatever situation they find themselves in. It also covers dispositionism, sorry for the mispronunciation there, which is internal factors and which internal factors can lead to how a person acts around other people or in certain situations. In the next section, 12.2, it is all about self-presentation. Self-presentation explains how social norms have a very big role in how people act and what cultures can deem appropriate and inappropriate, as well as who people interact with and how different people cause different reactions or interactions. In the movie The Breakfast Club, social norms are the entire point of the movie. We have the bad boy, the jock, the innocent, just to name a few. They all struggle to get along at first because of what their society has basically cemented as the social norms. In their heads, none of them have any reason to get along. But for the sake of the plot of the movie and to convey a message, they all break those social norms that originally divided them in the first place. Other things can have a factor in social norms, such as power, age, and a few others. This can change what social norms are and who falls under which certain rules within those norms. Section 12.3, Attitudes and Persuasion are the main focus. Attitudes are how individuals perceive our feelings towards a person, place, or thing. This is for the most part what we can control, and therefore an internal factor of social psychology. On the other hand, persuasion is an external factor, as it is something on the outside that affects our attitude. This can change our attitude towards a collective group of things or something in particular, like a person, place, or thing. Persuasion has two different routes it can follow. The first route being the central route, which uses facts and other information to persuade potential customers, such as an advertisement or over the radio or a billboard that you pass to and from school. The second route of persuasion is the peripheral route, which is when someone uses positive reinforcement such as fame, looks, money, etc., to convince someone to see something, usually something that was previously perceived in a bad light, in a much better way. This is often used by employers in the form of promotions or other rewards to boost up those that get their work done on time or to the employer's standards. In 1957, Leon Festinger, sorry for the mispronunciation there, defined cognitive dissonance as two or more inconsistent attitudes or behaviors. This is when you have two attitudes or behaviors or thoughts that bump heads with one another, such as if you know that smoking isn't good for you, but continue to smoke. This can affect one's attitudes or how one is persuaded. On one hand, your attitude towards something, like smoking, might be that it is bad for you and that people shouldn't do it. However, since you yourself do it, it is harder to be persuaded to quit, even though you know what the long-term effects can look like. Section 12.4 Conformity, Compliance, and Obedience. In this chapter, conformity is described as people being influenced to fit in. Compliance is used when people conform to something that they do not necessarily agree with or something that they go with that doesn't directly align with their values. The obedience falls over the people that comply and conform to those in power, following someone else's lead, the most common example being politics or politicians. The textbook does go more in depth, giving a few examples and studies conducted over the years. One being the Asch effect. Asch Solomon in the 1950s conducted an experiment of how others' thoughts and behaviors would affect those around them. He set up 3 lines labeled A, B, and C. He then would draw on a different sheet of paper line X. In this experiment, about 5 people would be put into a room. One of those people would be the real person undergoing the experiment. The rest were all Confederates, which are people that were planted there by Solomon himself. While one answer, A, B, or C, was clearly more correct than the other 2, the Confederates would act as though line B in this case was the correct answer, and Asch would then see how many times the one real person would change their answer to fit in with what everyone else is saying. Another example is Stanley Milgram. He witnessed a Nazi that used the defense that he was just following orders. This inspired Stanley to set up a case where, again, there were Confederates. They would fill in the role of the students. He would then go out and find people to be teachers. He would tell these teachers that they are going to give the students a learning shock and that it would boost enthusiasm and performance. These shocks were told to increase 15% in voltage all the way up to 140 volts per shock. The Confederates weren't actually being shocked in this case, but they would act as though they were shocked and having heart problems or even going unresponsive. 65% of the teachers, after hearing this, still went ahead and shocked them because Stanley told them to. This covered obedience. And as mentioned before, politics play a huge role in this in the modern day and age. Not only do some people feel as though one political party is right or considered the norm, but the entire point of anonymous voting is so that people in the moment don't succumb to conformity, compliance, or obedience. This section also goes over normative social influence, which is when someone makes a decision to fit in with a group or to be seen in a positive light. However, there's also informational social influence, which is where someone makes a decision or tries to fit in with a group that they deem competent or that falls more in line with their beliefs. An example of this would be something like a church. Section 12.5 is about prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice and discrimination in this chapter are exactly what they sound like, covering things such as racism and sexism, which I will get into later on. Social interactions can be affected by how others differ from one another. While this chapter seems to cover the darker side of social psychology, it nonetheless is still something that needs to be covered when talking about this in general. It has been shown throughout history, usually towards certain groups of people due to their skin color or religious beliefs, and other things that shouldn't cause us to think any differently of another human being, that we have prejudice and discrimination. These thoughts are usually called stereotypes, and for the most part, these days are considered offensive or at the very least outdated. Often throughout this section, those people are referred to as the outgroup. While not severe, things like private schools are a modern example of how we feed into prejudice and discrimination by splitting up kids based on social classes. Nowadays, most people are aware of the prejudice of the past and work to correct that. However, small things do still slip through today and can affect us in social interactions and influences. I talked about how Trayvon Martin was shot by George Zimmerman, most likely based on a bias or more so a discrimination that Zimmerman had. The only way that someone can really stop themselves is that after every conversation or interaction, they sit themselves down and think, was there absolutely any way that I looked at that person differently based off of their skin color, their height, their clothes? This also leads to self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when someone almost makes themselves fit the mold of a stereotype. This is when they change their behavior or demeanor to fit into what they think is their social norm, but in reality is just a stereotype that other people have made into the social norm. And while yes, you would think that while what are secondary factors such as eyes, clothes, and smile, height would play a much bigger role, age, race, and sex are often considered the main three topics for discrimination, or what leads us to discrimination. This is because it has been passed on from, as we've heard in history, times where people of different skin color were treated awfully, and although it is much better now, it's still not perfect as it has been passed down little by little from parent to child and for generations, and I'm sure, well, unfortunately, won't stop anytime soon. Section 12.6 covers aggression. Aggression is made up of two parts: hostile aggression and instrumental aggression. Hostile aggression is where someone has the intent to cause harm or pain, either physically or mentally, to someone else. Instrumental aggression is where someone uses their aggression to achieve goals and does not necessarily have to involve the intent to cause someone else harm. Bullying, which is considered a newer form of aggression, is causing someone else both physically and mentally pain, often because you are bigger than someone or more intimidating than someone else, and because they don't share similarities to you. And considered the 21st century form of bullying is cyberbullying, which is a huge thing now that social media has become the phenomenon we know it as today. With cyberbullying, people attack insecurities that people have online, so they themselves don't have to show any flaws or any features that might also get nitpicked. This can come back to bite people, as people have been doxxed, which isn't the most legal, but nonetheless is something that comes from their cyberbullying or can come from cyberbullying itself. There's also something called the bystander effect, which, despite social norms, is depicted as when someone is getting picked on or bullied, if there's a group of people, as long as one person doesn't act, the entire crowd will stay a bystander and not go in to help someone that is clearly in need of help. Finally, section 12.7 of this chapter covers prosocial behaviors. Prosocial behavior is simply how we act to be more social and how we act to gain friends or lovers. Things that play parts in this are proximity, what we choose to share, and common interests and similarities we may have. And I'm sure you all almost immediately assume that relationships falls under this. Often we find relationships with those that share similar backgrounds to us. This also works for friends. Robert Sternberg described the triangular theory of love as intimacy, passion, and commitment, which would ultimately lead to a healthy relationship. While other things do play a factor, such as what we deem attractive, which can differ from person to person based on culture or societal norms, we also take pros and cons into consideration as an exchange. What can we gain from being with this person, and what will we give up? This could look like not being as lonely, but also losing the freedom to make last-minute decisions. Finally, time to wrap things up, as I'm sure you are all very happy that we have to watch at least 3 of these videos to give feedback on by Wednesday. To wrap things up neatly, in conclusion, social psychology is the study of why it is we do what we do, say what we say, who we become friends with, who we become attracted to, and our self-presentation, our attitudes and our persuasions, our conformity, compliance, and obedience, our prejudice and discrimination, our aggression, and our overall pro-social behavior. At the end of the day, we all want to be seen in a good light. We don't want to have hostile aggression. We don't want to have prejudice and discrimination. We don't want to fall to conformity, compliance, and obedience. But nonetheless, that happens even in small factors. That is why I think Chapter 12 is a great piece of the textbook to look over, as can really help discover why it is we are the way we are and what we can do to change that, hopefully for the better.